This week on Diabetes Connections, Lauren Bongiorno has spent years helping others learn to thrive with diabetes with her company, Risely Health. Now, Lauren is sharing what it's been like to navigate her own pregnancy with type 1. From expectations versus reality to a major stressful event she and her husband experienced and why she had to push back on her doctors, Lauren opens up about this incredible and challenging chapter in her life. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and my son was diagnosed more than 18 years ago now, right before he turned 2. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting, local news, radio, and television, and that is how you get the podcast. As this episode is going live, Mom's Night Out Atlanta is coming up fast. In fact, registration is closing very soon. I will keep it open a little bit extra for any listeners that want to jump in. This is our in-person event for moms of kids with diabetes and for women with type 1. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it is unbelievably rewarding, so much fun. And I really urge you to come if you can make it to any of our cities. We'll be in 4 in 2025. You can go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Moms Night Out tab to learn more. Again, Atlanta is January 31st, coming up fast, and Cleveland is February 21st. That's up next. And speaking of moms, congratulations to Lauren Bongiorno. She had her baby earlier this month and all is well. I am sure she is sharing more on her social. As I am recording this, she hasn't announced anything yet. We taped this interview back in December. It was right before Lauren took time off for the holidays and to have her baby. So as you'll hear, we're talking about the very last weeks of her pregnancy. And while we've come a long way, pregnancy with type 1 is still considered high risk. And from the women I've spoken to, it is the most intense diabetes management of their lives. Lauren is used to helping other people go through life events with Risely Health, her company, where she helps people learn to thrive with type 1. So I was really interested to hear what she learned and what surprised her about pregnancy. And let me tell you, as somebody who has had 2 kids, I think your first pregnancy is one of the most surprising experiences of your life. There's so much that happens that people don't tell you, or they can tell you, but you really can't understand until you experience. It's like nothing else, even without diabetes. I do have to give a quick shout out to a dear family friend, Christina. She was my kid's babysitter, and her baby just turned 1 recently. Christina lives with type 1, and that's how we met. I think Benny was 5 when she was diagnosed as a young adult. And he just educated her right away. I will never forget her coming over and he took her hand and he was like, I'm going to tell you all about diabetes. And he did. But we went to visit her recently and she told us much of the same thing as you'll hear Lauren share about these women having to school their doctors, which I don't know why, but as you'll hear, I was surprised by that. All right, my conversation with Lauren Bongiorno right after this. I've been talking about integration for years, and it's just been wonderful to see it all happening. Dexcom G6 is part of Tandem Diabetes Control IQ system and part of the Omnipod 5 system. My son has been using Control IQ for more than 4 years now. These systems are really amazing. He sleeps better, and the system has his back when he doesn't get his meal bolus exactly right. As a mom, I will never stop worrying, but I worry a lot less. We all just think about diabetes less, which is really amazing. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Lauren, welcome to Diabetes Connections. I know as you listen, you're not necessarily seeing Lauren, but it is great to see you. I am excited to talk to you today. Thanks for being here.
Stacey, it's so good to see you as well. Thanks for having me back on the show.
How are you feeling?
We are 4 weeks out from having our first baby. And so I'm feeling good. I mean, generally I've had a really great pregnancy and I'm grateful for that. And at the same time, I'm at this place where I'm like, oh, okay. Like my body's starting to slow down a little bit and give me those cues that we're getting close.
Yeah. Let me ask you this to begin. You help so many people with type 1. You've shared your story and you've been open for so many years. preparing for a pregnancy with type 1 is its own thing. And I know you've shared a lot of this already, but take me back, if you don't mind, to when you and your husband were really talking through what did you do? Did you change your diabetes routine? And looking back, I'd love to ask you what changed and what was realistic. But let's just start there. Talk to me a little bit about the planning.
Yeah. So, and also just for reference for anybody listening who doesn't, if we haven't met yet, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 7 years old. And so, for the past 24 years, right, like I've been living with this condition. And at the same time, just because of the length of time that you live with diabetes, it doesn't equal mastery always. And it also doesn't equate to, oh, a pregnancy is going to be easy for you because, you just have lived with it for a while. The pregnancy standards that like you need to have, that control for, it's tight. I knew that because we have at Risley worked with so many women, really like helping them prep for pregnancy. I would say, yes, we have people that we see postpartum and during pregnancy, but majority, I would say, come through a year or 2 years beforehand because they realize, oh, wait, like I can't just get pregnant like everybody else at just, when we want to spontaneously, or I guess you can, but if you want to increase the health of the baby and the chances of, not having the complications that come with type 1, like you do want to put prep into it because of where your A1C needs to be. And then also for 9 months, the like rigid, just blood sugar tight control of 65 to 140 that you have to keep your blood sugars in. So all to say, I think, my husband and I, Chris, we're high school sweethearts. And so he, from like the earliest time was like, as soon as we get married, like I want to have kids, like I'm so excited for that. And so he's been ready to have kids like for as long as I've known him. We got married in 2022. And the natural next step that everybody was waiting for was like, oh, like let's, like Lauren and Chris are probably going to get pregnant, right away. And it took me personally about, I would say, a year and a half of mentally getting there that I was ready. And what was really interesting, Stacey, about it is that it had nothing to do with diabetes. And I share that because I was going through my own identity. I think like my just like thinking through who I was as a person, who I wanted to be when I was, going to go on this journey of becoming a mother and where I wanted my, business to be set up and what I wanted to accomplish before then. And it felt great in a way that was the only factor that I had to deal with, was just like growing through those, challenges, or like thinking through that. And that diabetes wasn't a factor because for the past several years, my A1C has been like around a 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, like 6.0 at its highest, like for probably 4, 5, 6 years. And so I didn't have to have that added pressure of, oh, when I'm ready, like I'm not ready yet because of diabetes.
Right.
And that was like really freeing for me because diabetes can hold us back from so many things. And like for it not to hold me back from starting a family, like it was a totally non-related diabetes thing. That was just the thing holding me back essentially, that I had to get there on my own. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And that's great to hear. And you mentioned the range that you're supposed to be in. Would you mind talking a little bit more about pregnancy expectations? And again, lots of people with diabetes do get pregnant without any prep and they do have healthy outcomes. But this is all about trying to increase the odds of those healthier outcomes, right?
Yes, of course, of course. And, it's the same thing as saying, my grandfather smoked, a pack of cigarettes a day for, 30 years and he never got lung cancer, right? Like there's going to be times where you hear of type 1s who have had higher blood sugars or higher A1Cs and have had, babies that were fine. But the research really does show that not only the preparation stage, but also obviously during the pregnancy, the numbers have to be tight. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So essentially at least 3 to 6 months before you get pregnant or start trying, you want your A1C to be around between a 6.0 and a 6.5, definitely less than a 7, because the research shows that decreases fertility and increases risks of very early on miscarriage. And so that first trimester is really key because that's where all of like the structural development is happening. That's where birth defects that will impact baby's organs, like that's a really sensitive time. So you not only want to have the prep beforehand in order to increase your risk of getting pregnant, but so that you're not getting pregnant and then all of a sudden you're playing catch up of like, wait a second, my numbers have to be, go from a 7.5 A1C to now like suddenly under a 6. So it's like that progression and stage that you want to be prepping your body for. And then once you do get pregnant, the goal is under a 6 A1C or 70% time in range between 63 and a 140 blood sugar.
just want to say, of course, I don't live with type 1. The idea of how much extra has to go into a pregnancy like that is daunting, because I remember my doctor saying, like, we want you at this weight. Obviously, and I didn't smoke, but, alcohol consumption, caffeine, medication, environmental, work stuff. Oh my gosh. And you're thinking, like, it's one thing to take care of yourself and then knowing, well, I'm growing a human being and I want this dude or this girl to be as healthy as they can be mentally. And I'm skipping all over the place, but that's how we do things around here. Mentally, what is that like? I mean, you've had, and as you've said, you have been in range, your A1C is lower, but even still, Lauren, that's got to be very difficult.
Oh, yeah. It's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do with type 1 diabetes. And to your point, because of the pressure that there is and the Dexcom, even the CGM, I mean, I used to, and I think we all respond to those alerts in a heightened way, and our bodies naturally go into that fight or flight mode when we hear that high Dexcom alarm. But I want you to imagine literally knowing what you know about, okay, all the complications that come with type 1, increased risk for stillbirth, miscarriage, preeclampsia, structural development issues, growth, like all of those things. And then you see your alarm go over 140 for the first time when you're pregnant. Like, imagine what that does to you. So I think that has been truly the hardest, one of the hardest parts, I would say, about it. Another part, which we'll probably get into, but is like the advocacy and the conversations that you have to have with your doctors. I think that's been a little bit challenging for me to navigate. But mostly, yeah, it's like the pressure of knowing that you have to do everything you can to keep your blood sugar at like technically a non-diabetic range, but with the added challenge of not having a pancreas that produces insulin, and with the added challenges, really, Stacey, of the insulin resistance that progresses throughout the entire, 40 weeks.
Okay. And we're going to talk about insulin resistance, but I want to lean into what you just said about advocacy. I did not have that on my list.
Oh,
tell me more. What do you mean, talking to doctors who are not familiar with type 1?
No, Stacey. Oh, this is like opening up a can of worms.
I love it.
Yeah, you love us. I know you love us. Let's just do it. Get right into it. You asked me earlier about preparation, and when you get pregnant, you don't have diabetes, you go see your OBGYN once you get pregnant. When you have type 1, you see the maternal fetal medicine practitioner. So it's like the MFMs are what they're called, and they're high risk OBGYNs. And so you working with your endocrinologist and you're working with your MFMs, and every clinic is different. My endo, I've had a great relationship with for years, and she is within the clinic that has the MFM. So they work really well together, which is a blessing. And kind of almost the MFMs are like, we'll just do the scans and we'll prep for labor, but like blood sugars and everything, we trust you and your doctor to go, hit those targets. Other people all don't have that kind of interconnectedness. And so there's a lot of like battling sometimes that happens between MFMs and the endocrinologist, or the MFMs will say, hey, I'm their primary person that is going to manage your blood, they're going to help you with your blood sugars, but they're just like meeting you when you're pregnant for the first time. There's like a lot of things that can happen. And I'll share what my experience has been. So essentially, when you go through a type 1 diabetic pregnancy, it is the medical standard that they are going to induce you between 37 and 38 weeks. Like that is like, it's almost like, oh, you have type 1 diabetes, here's insulin. And if you ever get pregnant, this is what we're going to do. And there are many people who are like, heck yes, like this baby gets to come out of me 37, 38 weeks. Like, let's do this. Can't wait. Sign me up. For me personally, I am not somebody who wants to be induced, and have always imagined just my body going into labor naturally. I'm a very just kind of like intuitive, in tune person, like that. I want to honor the process of just what I know my body can do, and like all the women who have come before me that have created life. Like, I think it's such a beautiful thing, and I recognize that there are reasons for induction. And if I have preeclampsia, if there's low amniotic fluid, I'm like, if this baby's in distress, heck yes, like let's put down that date and like induce me. But what I've had a challenge with is that there is no medical reason that they have given me to be induced other than the fact that I just have type 1 diabetes. So I don't have any other risk factors, blood pressure, great. Like every time we go on for scans now, every week, as we're recording this, I'm 36 weeks pregnant. So I've been in every week since 32 weeks. Like everything looks great, but because you're type 1, we're going to induce you at 38 weeks. And what I didn't like in the beginning was that I have 7 different MFMs within the practice. And so I was seeing a different person each time. And that I was like, oh man, like I wish I could establish a relationship with the doctor that's going to deliver. And I'm not going to have that. But the benefit that it has had is that I have started to recognize the doctors that are like way more fear-based, will throw any tactic at you if you're not listening to them and like not being induced, versus the ones that are like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like your blood sugars, you've been your average A1C has been like a 5.2 this entire pregnancy. Like, yeah, like you don't have higher risk factors. Like let's not induce you. Let's see if you can get to, 40 and a half weeks. And so it's just been emotional because I haven't had 100% control over the scheduling of what doctor I'm seeing. And so like I'm doing as much as I can to kind of manipulate like who I'm seeing, but sometimes I have to see a doctor that is a little bit more stern. So it's also inconsistency that I'm receiving from the conversations that I'm having every week that I go. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with advocating. And I think as a woman, especially having those conversations, like I would consider myself a very pleasant, respectful person. And so the first time that I was like, oh yeah, hey, so I'd love to talk about me not getting induced. It was like, I don't want to come across as I'm, being dismissive or disrespectful to all, them or the research that I know exists out there. But I also want them to know that a lot of the research that has been done on pregnancy with type 1, it's not controlled versus uncontrolled. And I hate using that term uncontrolled, but let's just for, sake of the conversation,
we get it.
You get it. It's all in one pool. So they're researching and they're saying, okay, it doesn't matter if the person's A1C is a 5.5 or if it's a 9, that's the standard. And so there's no personalization to it. And that's what frustrates me is if you're not advocating and if it's something that you want, you don't even know that you have an option to not be induced. But at the end of the day, it's your body and you have to kind of find what you're comfortable with and get those conversations.
I really shouldn't be surprised that having to speak up for yourself like that is such a big part of this, because that's unfortunately the experience of almost all of type 1 diabetes. Unless you're working with somebody who's extremely well informed, and very ahead of the curve, a lot of the information that they have may be outdated. And certainly all of Benny's childhood, I can't tell you how many times I spent saying, well, really, actually.
Right. Or even too, Stacey, with the insurance companies, that's been crazy because my insulin needs have went up, more than doubled. And the amount of times that like, they're not, giving me an extra vial that I need and I'm running out. And now I'm like, taking insulin out of the backup pens that I have in my fridge. And it's just like, why it's been so hard. Like, it's not like it hasn't been easy, and not that I'm expecting it to be easy, but it's just like things that shouldn't be roadblocks.
Well, and insulin resistance in pregnancy is very well known. I mean, we were told all the time that Benny's insulin use during his teenage years will be the most in his whole life. Well, unless he was going to have a pregnancy, right? So does that bear out? I mean, talk to me about the insulin resistance. And it's not consistent the whole time, right? It's kind of up and down. Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.
No, yeah, it's been fascinating to see. Everyone is slightly different. Like if you read the OG book for this is Ginger Vieira's Pregnancy with Type 1 Diabetes. And it's like the Bible for if you're getting pregnant, you're going to read it. But she outlines kind of week by week what to expect. And I followed that. I followed along out of interest of like, how much does this match up? And I would say I was about 2 weeks off and mine was delayed. So, give or take, but this is generally what happens and what we've seen too with our coaching members at Risley. So first trimester, and I'm going to speak in once again, like for me and generally what we see. So first trimester, and to give you an idea, before getting pregnant, I was using about 30 units of insulin a day total. So total like background and fast acting. I work on my insulin sensitivity because it makes eating carbs easier and I work out a lot and it's just my lifestyle. So I don't use a ton of insulin. When I found out I was pregnant, weeks like 4 through 10 of the first trimester. So first trimester being 12 weeks, you don't really find out until week 4. I started averaging about 45 units per day. And what's interesting about that is that you hear blanket statements of like, oh, your first trimester, you have increased insulin sensitivity. You're going to see a lot of lows. And for me, my insulin usage went up about, at least 15 units. And my insulin to carb ratios decreased from about like a 1 to 12, 1 to 10 to a 1 to 8, 1 to 9. And then into the second trimester, that's when I hit more in the beginning. So weeks 11 through 17, that's when I hit more of my insulin sensitivity. So my total daily units went down to 38 units. So it went down, and my total daily dose was actually even just like higher, not so much because of the amount of insulin I needed just like to keep me afloat, but more so because I was so hungry and I was like eating a lot more. And so that was my pattern. And then once you hit weeks, like I would say 19, 20, 21, up until the end of the second trimester, that's when like this insulin is water. Like, what is going on here? And you're like, I don't understand. Like, I'm literally having team meetings and having to like be like, all right, I'm going off camera because I need to do like 50 jump squats right now because nothing is helping. So that's when I saw the biggest increase in my insulin needs. They went up to about in the second trimester, I would say like 55 units. And then weeks 30 through 36, where I'm at right now, I'm taking about 65 to 70 units per day.
Yeah. So I mean, you're talking, that's incredibly dramatic, more than doubling.
Yeah. And exactly. And so that also comes with you're using more insulin pods, like they're not lasting as long. So it's, those kind of like added challenges beyond just like the extra insulin. But yeah, I'm down to like a really low insulin to carb ratio and correction factor. And it's just what my body needs.
Yeah. And I like that you said it's just what your body needs, because there is, I don't know what the right word is. I wouldn't say stigma, but there seems to be guilt. Or, I mean, because I don't know. Listen, I can only speak for myself and my situation. I've never felt like anybody else's situation was something where I would say, oh, that's terrible that they're doing it. But I always felt terrible that we were giving Benny so much insulin. I'm like, oh no, I feel so guilty. What are we doing wrong? He had incredible insulin resistance in his teenage years and still some today. Some of that's genetic. But at the same time, you got to do what you got to do. Knowing everything that you know, did you have a little bit of a weird feeling about increasing the needs like that?
I would say too, even like a broader comment on this topic is that everybody, I did a post on this recently where you go into your doctor, the doctor will see highs after a meal. And like the common response is, oh, you need to be giving more insulin for food. Let's increase your insulin to carb ratio or just carb count better. And that's kind of what I like to say is like on the surface above the iceberg. But if you go below, which is really what people are coming to us at Risely for coaching, is more of that, like, what are those blocks that they that are keeping them stuck that they haven't been able to get past on their own? And oftentimes, like, I mean, at least 60% of the time, it's people's relationship to insulin. And a lot of us have these arbitrary numbers of, when we were diagnosed, we 3 units was what we took for our 3 units or 30 carbs, whatever it was, is that we get, it was used to for our meals. But like when we think about it, like, and we get used to that, it's just an arbitrary number of what our comfort level is. And it's oftentimes paired with like a fear of low blood sugar or a fear of weight gain. And it's really important to explore like the why behind that, because it doesn't matter how many times you tell somebody you need to get more insulin for your breakfast. If the root is they can't get past a certain number, or they feel shame, or they're afraid of weight gain, they're not going to give what they actually need, and their blood sugars are going to go high afterwards. Even though the irony behind it is you're going to need to correct anyways and give more insulin.
It's very mental.
Yeah. But I would say for me, like I even noticed that in myself. Like when I went, like I'm giving, 10 units for a meal that I used to give 2.5 units for. And it is really just like bolusing your way to confidence, I would say. And so what that is, and how I think through that is just recognizing what you're giving is not working. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so we need to slowly start increasing, realizing, oh, wait, I'm not going low. I'm not tanking from this. Okay, this is actually what my body needs, until you get to the point of having that accurate dose.
I have a really dumb question.
No dumb questions.
Oh, well, we'll see. Do they make you do the glucose test? Like, do you have to drink the sugary glucosey drink and then you sit there in the office? Like, wait, is that even in the realm of experience when you have type 1 pregnancy? Or do they just say, yeah, you have type 1 and they check the box and move on?
That sounds like a huge liability. Like, I feel like at one point they were all sitting around a room and they were like, should we make the type ones do a glucose test? I don't know. And then somebody said, yeah, probably not.
I
No,
mean,
you don't have to.
thank God. I was just thinking,
Yeah.
like, you never know with insurance companies or people being ignorant. I was just, that's like I mean, I can remember that taste. So disgusting. But, important to
People
do.
talk about that and say it's like the most horrible experience and
Oh,
you just stomach ache and you're like, I've heard that just from like my friends who aren't, type one. So that's like the two benefits you get from having a type one pregnancy are you don't have to do the glucose test and you get a lot of sonograms. So you get to see your baby a lot. Those are the silver linings.
All right,
No.
good. Just on the side here, not really type one. How has the pregnancy been? It's such a unique experience. I mean, I've been through it twice. I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah. It's so hard to talk about like the pregnancy as a whole without it like being connected to type 1 because it really is such like a central part of the experience for me in the past 9 months and even more than that. But I would say I feel really fortunate. Like I know a lot of people don't have great pregnancies and they feel sick the whole entire time. I had maybe 2, 3 bouts of like that classic morning sickness. One actually, funny enough, was on the way to go to the conference that you and I saw each other last at, the ADA conference, where I literally was on the side of the airport getting sick before my flight. And I was like, I haven't been sick this entire time. Like, why is this happening on the one work trip I have to go on? And then I showed up, saw all you guys, and then got home and was like, okay, we made it through. But all to say, like I would say first trimester, yeah, you're not feeling like yourself. You're feeling kind of like bloated, like you're just like energy is a little bit low. Other than that, I've worked out pretty much like 85% of the pregnancy, 4 or 5 days a week. I've really, really focused on that for my insulin sensitivity because you're already combating the insulin resistance. So like that on top of it. And I can't imagine if you are like really, really sick and nauseous, like that is probably like a really big added challenge. First trimester, I was not eating well. I would say like I was doing like the bare minimum, but like I really didn't have an appetite for vegetables or, like the classic easier to bolus for foods that you think that you're doing. And that's actually like a big learning lesson I've had was before getting pregnant, I am a very extreme person. So like if you push that button in me or I push it in myself, I'm like, I can turn it on. Like I was a Division I athlete in college. Like I can be disciplined. I thought like for 9 months, I'm like, yep, in order to keep my blood sugars in range, what I'm like in this tight range, what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be eating salad all day long, vegetables, like low carb, like this. Like I had this whole plan. And then you get pregnant and you're like, oh, like that's not really sustainable. I literally don't put that lettuce by me. I will literally throw up. Like can have no appetite for that. And you have to kind of figure out how to, meet your body where it's at truly. And that's where I think that's what I was really grateful for was like, if I didn't know my patterns before getting pregnant, even though the patterns change during pregnancy, it transfers like your hormonal patterns, especially for women pre-pregnancy and like your cycle, that is huge in being able for you to adapt to the stages and the quick changes, like sometimes week to week or like every 3 days that you have to change your insulin needs. And I realized like, oh, like the things that I knew before pregnancy that allowed me to eat pizza or that allowed me to have bread or that allowed me to have higher carb things, like it transfers to pregnancy as well. And I kind of like disproved or like, yeah, I guess like I thought I had this like plan and idea of what pregnancy would be. And in a very pleasant way, I was surprised that it was like, oh no, like this doesn't have to be miserable for 9 months. And I was really happy about that.
Well, it's funny. My next question was going to be what surprised you because I knew you came into this with a plan.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just knowing you, I'm like, and I will share, and I know I'm probably oversharing for my pregnancy, but I will share that when I was pregnant with my daughter, my feeling was I am going to try to gain as little weight as possible by eating all these healthy foods and, blah, blah, blah. And by the time I was very careful and, by 6 months in, I had gained, I don't know. Oh, I'll just put it this way. By the end of my pregnancy with my daughter, I had gained almost 70 pounds and I was freaking out, and I lost it all. But when I got pregnant with Benny, I was like, you know what? We're going to be kinder to ourselves. We're going to be okay, but I'm going to try to still eat healthily. I think by about 2 months in, I don't know if this is a second child thing, I had gained like 35 pounds already. It was like, boom, boom. And I was like, you know what? We're gonna calm down. We're gonna eat what my body wants to eat, and we're gonna slowly. And it came off. I was was very lucky in that way. But
Yeah.
that really surprised me. So I wanted to ask you, what surprised you, and what from your planning you
Yeah.
kind of threw out the window? And you kind of answered a little bit of it, but was there anything else?
Yeah. And just to kind of like summarize and double down on like the centralized point that I want to express is that like knowing your body before pregnancy and really understanding your patterns with your hormones, with exercise, with food, that is going to allow you to have so much more ease in your pregnancy because that's what your whole 9 months is. It's figuring out the patterns, trying to, as much as you can, adapt to the insulin resistance, and being able to honor your body. Another thing I will add to is I was not on birth control, like hormonal birth control beforehand. And there are a lot of women with type 1 diabetes who are on hormonal birth control. They come off of it and then they try to get pregnant, right? And that to me is so you're doing yourself such a disservice because when you're on HBC, your hormones are like flatlined. And so you're not getting that like cyclical every month increase in insulin sensitivity, decrease in insulin resistance, and then increase in resistance, decrease in sensitivity. And so you don't have an opportunity to learn how to optimize your tech to its, to what's happening in your body or to eat foods at different times and, adjust your insulin to carb ratios or what it's like to exercise in one phase of your cycle versus another phase of your cycle. And lacking that education is not setting yourself up for success. So I would say if somebody is type 1 diabetic and on HBC, definitely like giving yourself some time to understand the cycles of sensitivity and resistance and learning how to adjust to them because you're going to have to do that for 9 months during your pregnancy. So I was surprised really how similar I would say that, the overlaps were.
Again, knowing you're speaking for yourself here, not the whole diabetes community. You mentioned technology. Can you share what you used, what you liked about the technology that you used?
Absolutely. So I have been on Omnipod for several years, and then the Omnipod 5 system for the last 2 years. And if you read a lot of Facebook groups, there are a lot of endocrinologists who will say, oh, you're getting pregnant, you're on Omnipod 5, like go into manual mode. It's not going to be able to keep up with your resistance. Or I saw this morning a crazy message where this girl was like, yeah, my endo told me that she was talking about Tandem, but she was like that the Tandem wasn't, going to keep my blood sugars great and that I have to switch to Medtronic, which I'm like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But okay. And so there's a lot of this, whatever the endocrinologist like experience is, even if it's limited, even if they've only worked with a handful of type 1s, like they project it onto potentially like the patient instead of the patient being the one kind of in the driver's seat saying like, hey, like I know how to optimize my tech and here's what I want to try, and having it be like a joint conversation. And so that's what it's very much like with my endocrinologist. And I've earned her trust, in that way. And so for me, Omnipod 5 has worked truly great the entire time. And I have seen that what happens in automated mode is that it takes a little bit, not right away, but like once you start giving yourself a lot more insulin for a few days, maybe there's going to be like 3, 4, 5 days where the algorithm is not able to keep your blood sugars down. But eventually, after a few days of having that higher, intake, it's going to catch up and it's going to start to know like what's up. And so what I started to do once that insulin resistance really started to peak from weeks like 20 to 30, I would say, was that I did a mix of manual mode and of auto mode. And so once I noticed, okay, this week, whoa, wait a second, like we got to change those insulin carb ratios, got to change those correction factors, I would just put the pump on manual mode. I would stay in manual mode for about like 3, 4 days. And then by day 4, I was able to confidently use the auto mode for definitely overnights, which is about 33% of your day. So that's like an easy win, keeping yourself, under 120. And then, I would still stay in manual mode during the day, but it was kind of like a mix and a hybrid. So I think it really is important for people to know how like their basal rates work, because a lot of people who are diagnosed now, they just get put on the automated insulin systems and they're like, basals, like you don't need to know your basals, like this pump just does it for you. But when you are going through pregnancy, right, like you're going to have to probably play with in manual mode for not maybe the entire time, but at least partial if you're comfortable going back and forth between the two. And that confidence and that skill is really important to have.
I want to take you through, if it's okay, this very stressful event that you and your husband went through, not related necessarily to the pregnancy, but just to point out how life happens and diabetes happens around it. Do you mind sharing? I mean, this horrible flood. This was. I'm so sorry this happened.
No, it's okay. We're healed from it.
Oh.
There's still a little PTSD, but like I'm happy to discuss it because I think it hits on the point that you just made. So my husband and I, we went on a early baby moon. His family, his dad was born in Croatia, so they have a lot of family over there, and so we've been going there for a lot of summers over the time that we've been together. So August, we had this week and a half trip planned to Croatia. We were so excited about it. So we go there, we're enjoying it, and right before we went there, we went into contract on our dream home, which happened to be 2 doors down from the home that we bought, our first home, which is, but we bought it in 2020. And it was like so perfect timing because I'm like, we weren't even looking. Like it was, just like the house that we're like, oh, like one day we'd love to live in a house like that. Like we'd walk around the block and be like, oh, like we're so excited, and then it became available to us. So we ended up going into contract to not only purchase that house, but also to sell the house that we are living in. So now we're going to Croatia with this clear head, and we're like, wow, like we made it happen. We just get to go home, after this trip, pack, and then all will be well and done. And so we fly home from the trip on a Friday night. Saturday was pretty much a like, you're tired, you're unpacking, like that kind of day. And then Sunday was, all right, like let's get into packing mode. And so the house we used to live in was a ranch. It was small. And so we had a bunch of boxes from Home Depot that we got. They were, just cardboard boxes. And we packed up probably 20 of them, mostly around the clothes that no longer fit me, which was like 95% of my wardrobe. We packed up also like the winter coats and, the wedding dress and from the attic. And we took everything down and we said, okay, so we're not living for the next couple of weeks, just on on our main floor with all these boxes, let's put them in our basement. And so we put them in the basement, and that was Sunday. My mom came over, she helped us. We spent probably like 6-7 hours, doing all that. And then I went to bed around 10 o'clock that night. Chris went to bed around 11:30. When he went to bed, it started to rain. And we live on Long Island, which is, not really it's not like a flood. It's not a flood zone. There's like nothing like this that has ever happened before. But when he went to bed, it started to rain and he thought nothing of it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, so 3.5 hours later, I woke up to a sound that like it's very traumatizing. Like even when I think about it, because I'm like, I never want to hear that again. And I can imagine like that jolt of if you're a parent, like almost like my mom says, like the phone call in the middle of the night. Like if I ever was like calling her anything, she's like immediately like, what is wrong? Like you just go into this fight or flight mode. Like that's how it felt. And I hear this like screaming, and it wasn't like anger and it wasn't fully crying. It was almost like pleading, like, oh my God, like, why is this happening? Why? Oh my God, like, what do I do? Like all this. And I like wake up in a half sleep. I look over to get Chris because I'm like, what's going on? Do you hear that noise outside? And then I realize that he's not next to me, and it's that he's the one screaming. And so I jump out of bed and I run and follow his voice. And there Chris is standing on the top step of our 10-step basement, and there is water up until the 9th step, basically like hitting his feet. It looked like a scene from the Titanic.
Oh my God.
There was, you can't even like comprehend how much water, and then just all of our things like floating, just everything. The washing and dryer was floating. Everything is just muddy and water. And this water it was a flash flood. It broke through and shattered our storm door and pushed the wooden basement door after the storm, got it through the storm door, literally off of its hinges. That's how powerful it was. And so at 3 a.m. now we're dealing with like, what do you even do in this situation? And so now we're trying to call, the flood people and ServPro. And of course they're not picking up. And now we're Googling and all this, but all to say it was a trickle effect of probably about like an 8-week, just very high stress every single day, like environment that we were both living in, because not only did our house flood, not only are we dealing with those repairs, but we are under contract to close on that house, and we can't buy our new house unless we close on that house. And so there was just a lot of moving pieces that were happening, and it was like lawyers and this and that and money and expenses and buying a boiler and a washing machine and repairing doors and things to a house that we're selling that we're not even, going to be, using and for if we, are able to move. So all to say, and I'll bring it back to the diabetes piece, is that the second trimester was really challenging because of the insulin resistance. But on top of the insulin resistance was the just everyday stress of this environment, of what happened and this experience that really made me realize on a larger scale, like when people go through grief and they have type 1 diabetes, or when they have, traumatic life events like this, or they lose a job, or there's not certainty in their life around a big move that they're making or whatever it is, you can't show up for yourself in the way that you have to in order for you to feel good. And so the first week, like no matter how much my parents or Chris was like, you have a baby inside you, like you have to take care of you. Like it's so hard. Like, I mean, I was not meditating. I was not being like, yes, like everything's going to work out. Like we were in it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Sitting on my parents' couch eating goldfish, Stacey. Like I haven't
Of
had
course.
like 10 years. And I'm now like eating bags of goldfish and my blood sugar is like double arrows up. And I'm crying as my blood sugars are up and I'm just irritable and tired. And it was hard. It was hard. So I would say like after probably like 3-4 days of that, I was like, and you're dealing with like the sleep deprivation because of, the repairs and everything. It's just a lot. Then I finally was like, all right, you got to like figure out a way to work through this because this isn't ending. Like we have a long ways to go now with the closings getting pushed back and all of that. But even then still like getting myself to go to the gym, focusing on my nutrition, it helped, but there was that under layer of that stress that for sure impacted my blood sugars, and something that for my second pregnancy, I'm just like, I pray that we're not moving, like nothing is happening during that time, because it was probably the hardest part about the pregnancy was that.
And I'm sorry to take you through all of it again, but I appreciate you sharing that because there is a lot that's out of our control in life. And to know that you're human, I think it makes you laugh, but I think it's really important for people to know because it's just, I'm so sorry that you went through all of that.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, it's funny when I think about pregnancy and type 1 diabetes, and again, do not have diabetes myself. I could not believe when Benny was diagnosed before he turned 2, several of my friends brought up the movie Steel Magnolias. So they said things like, well, at least he's not a girl, so you don't have to worry about pregnancy. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Like, this is my baby boy. Like, I couldn't even relate. But that movie has a hold on a lot of people because it is the only representation of type 1 pregnancy that many people see, even people in the diabetes community. And I'm so grateful. Anytime, I know it's a true story, and I know it's that family story. It's a story from a long time ago. It's also a story, and this was pointed out to me by the amazing Melissa Lee, in which the woman has no diabetes community. There's nobody else in that movie with diabetes that's talking to her, that we see, that she's got nobody to relate to. And so when we have folks who can talk about pregnancy in a more modern and I don't want to say positive way, because I'm not trying to put rose-colored glasses on this, but I know that we have a lot of parents who listen and a lot of young adults with type 1 who are, hoping to have a pregnancy in their future and want little kids. I guess my question for you is not about Steel Magnolias, although if you can talk about it if you want to, but just about what you want people to know overall about pregnancy and type 1 diabetes, right? What should the community look for here?
Yeah. I would say that if we all could choose to not have diabetes for 9 months, right? It would all say, yep, sign me up. Would love to do that and go through this pregnancy without this added challenge, because that it is. And there are real risks and complications. And I should say too, there are even people who have tight A1Cs and hit those targets during pregnancy, and some complications still happen. And it's just a result of the fact of the condition that we're living with. And at the same time, I like to look at it as type 1 diabetes isn't our fault, but it is our responsibility. And so while we wouldn't choose to have it and choose to go through pregnancy with type 1, it is our responsibility that if we want to bring life into this world, which I can't even imagine like a bigger purpose or gift than that, then we have to be able to invest in the time and the understanding of what we need to do in order to increase our risks of having a healthy pregnancy. It is 100% possible. I am somebody who believes that like the more of what you lean into is the more of what you're going to believe. And so if you're finding and searching for those stories that are going to tell you all the scary things. Like, you are going to live in a state of fear. And so I hope by sharing my story, and I know it's not complete yet, but I hope that it inspires, moms of young girls who have type 1, or, women who want to have babies one day, to know that it is possible for you, and that, yeah, you can do it. And that I'm proud of all of us who have been through it, and for those who are going to be on that journey as well.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for joining me and sharing so much of your story. Continued good health. I'm so excited for you and your family, and we just wish you all of the best in these next couple of weeks and for the future. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stacey, and thanks for giving space to this conversation for the show.
So once again, as I said at the beginning, Lauren has had her baby. And as I'm recording, I don't have more information than that, but I will link up her socials. I'm sure that she is sharing more and you can learn more from her. I will also link up more information about pregnancy and T1D. I do think Ginger Vieira has incredible research and books on this. I will link that up as well. And more about Lauren Bongiorno, of course. All right, I hope you can join us for Mom's Night Out in Atlanta or Cleveland or Minneapolis this fall or Phoenix this fall. These events are so much fun. And if you've listened this long, you can use this promo code MNOHALF to save 50% off any of the cities where registration is open. All right. Thanks to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.